Hey, Simon Rainier, Links Armizare, and I have a really cool fish tank. So, when you're first getting started on training, and if you're on your own especially, it can be a little daunting. Fortunately, there are some great resources out there. First off, there's kind of an age-old debate about whether or not you can learn martial arts from a book. I'm not going to get too deep into that right now. Basically, the answer is kind of. A lot of us in the HEMA world are kind of doing that. What you need is a training partner, basically someone to try this stuff out with. I always like seeing people posting videos of them exploring techniques, and maybe it doesn't quite mesh with sort of what the community as a whole is doing, but it's really cool seeing people figure stuff out. And sometimes they come up with some really cool new interpretations. Sometimes they look at it and it's like, maybe not. But you know what? That's okay. That's what it's all about. It's learning, trying new things. And basically, we're recreating martial arts that died out in some cases hundreds of years ago. There's no real way to know who has sort of the original technique down as they would have practiced it. We're all kind of guessing, and the only thing we can do is try things out and see if they work or if they don't. So we have a lot of great books out there. You can find stuff on YouTube for sort of the visual stuff, and sort of my goal for this channel is to eventually have a library of every single play that Fiore shows. Whether or not that'll come to fruition is, well, we're gonna try. And it'll be a while. So until then, there are other YouTube channels out there. Go ahead, search them out, find them yourself. But there's a lot of great books. First off, anything by Guy Windsor. Particularly his Mastering the Art of Arms. It's basically, he goes through sort of the basic entry levels of Fiore's system and shows how it works in a very, very accessible way, using modern phrasing, and there's no translations from old manuals, or no sort of medieval style pictures that aren't always the easiest to interpret. He breaks it down very simply. I don't unfortunately have a physical copy of any of his books to show you. I've purchased them all digitally, which is another great thing you can do. Sort of a side note, I have an e-reader. I love it. I load it up with all kinds of old fight books and so forth. But it's great to have physical copies of things too. So most of the really important ones I do have physical copies of. At the very basic level, we have The Flower of Battle, translated by Colin Hatcher and layout by Tracy Mello. This is a great book. Basically, all it is a translation into English of Fiore, and it's a great resource for me. I almost always have it with me when I have it. Lives in my sword bag, basically. If I have a sword with me, I have this book because I love whipping it out and showing it off. Anyway, so translation, direct translation, good to have. It can be a little difficult for a total beginner to get into. So, thankfully, we have Armizare. And this is a really great book by Robert Fiore, I'm going to say his name is. It's not the complete system. It's not every single thing in Fiore is not in this book. But what it does have is photographic breakdowns of all of the sort of the primary techniques. A lot of the grappling stuff is kind of glossed over and skipped, but all the sword stuff is in there. A lot of the armored fighting is in here, which is really cool. I'm not expecting anyone first starting out to actually own their own suit of armor, but you know what? That's okay. And it breaks it down really well, really clearly, and it's an excellent place to start. You can probably tell I've had this book around a while. I've kind of almost outgrown it, and that I don't read it that much. I prefer to go to the actual source wherever possible. But it's a great place for beginners to have for a while. It was really hard to get a hold of because I think everyone was just buying it so they could practice with it. You get that book and a training partner, and you're basically good to go for the basics. And Training Sword helps. Talked about that before. Yeah, it's a great book. Both of those are really great options. There is another Fiore book out on the market, which again I don't actually own. That's about that thick and has a lot more sort of context involved. So it tells you more about sort of life in the medieval Italy. And I had a chance to flip through it at one point. And it's a really cool book. And at some point, I'm probably going to buy it. It is more expensive, though. I think the last time I saw it for sale, it was on for about $120. So these kind of books are expensive. 50 bucks. 50 bucks is generally about sort of the normal price for a good quality production of one of the manuals, whether it's a translation or an actual book that someone has written more to. 50 bucks seems to be about sort of the minimum for anything of any quality, which it's not cheap, but this is not the cheapest of hobbies. Actually, it can be. Get a couple of sticks and look at some online materials. The nice thing about most of these manuals is Wiktionary.com has translations for a lot of them, and it's also a really great resource. There's also, so long as you're not an iPhone user, there's an app that's only for Android as of yet. It's called the Pocket Armizare, and I'll try to provide links and so forth down below. But that's a great one. It's a free app. It has translations of each of the different versions of Fiore, and you have it on your phone. You have a fighting book with you all the time, which is cool, without having to scroll through web pages or anything. It's really well laid out for mobile users. It's great resource to have. Now, that's sort of the core of Fiore. That's what you need for Fiore. I highly, highly recommend everyone doing historical European martial arts to read George Silver's Paradoxes of Defense, and to a lesser extent his brief instructions upon the Paradoxes of Defense. This is a version that has paradoxes and brief instructions in it. Paul Wagner put together this book, and it's a great book. It has sort of a layout of the different weapons that would have been used at the time. It has some of the cultural context, and within it is a really cool theory that George Silver knew William Shakespeare. They were living in the same part of town in the same time. So it is possible. The basic takeaway is George Silver had a rival Italian teacher who was teaching in London at the time, and this was kind of a blasphemy to him, called Saviolo. And the theory in this book is that Saviolo and George Silver were Mercury, Quicksilver, George Silver, and Tybalt from Romeo and Juliet were based on these fencing masters who were around the time. And it's kind of cool. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. If you know my views of history, it's never 100% important that it's super historically accurate, because everything gets so vague and so difficult to interpret farther back you go, that sometimes just having a good story is more important to me than it is to actually be 100% historically accurate. Historical accuracy is cool, but it's not the be-all, end-all. Anyway, George Silver has some really great advice for martial artists and people who use swords in particular. There's actually and this may just be my read of it, there's actually a lot of sort of similarities in the way he approaches things to the way Fiore approaches things, which I think is really cool. And fair warning with George Silver is he requires some thought when you read it, because when you read it, he's bashing on the Italian rapier fencers so hard that it's easy to come away thinking that's all there is in there, but it does actually contain a lot of like really solid martial principles and really great advice. At the end of the day, even when I'm teaching Fiore, there's always a little bit of George Silver thrown in there just to kind of round it out and make it more better, more effective, and so on. So yeah, the other nice thing about George Silver is it's in English, Shakespearean era English, which is, as far as I'm concerned, still modern English. There are some words you kind of have to think a little harder about, and of course some of the meanings have changed slightly, but for the most part, anyone can pick up this book and read it, no problem, so long as they have a decent grasp of English. So I always like finding things that aren't translated, because it's so easy to you got to trust the translation, and there's only so far you can do that. Even the most respected translators can make mistakes, whereas if you're reading it, you at least all the mistakes are yours and not someone else's. So that part I like. So yeah, obviously Fiore-centric, being that's sort of where my passion lies. There are other books out there that do sort of the German style of doing things with the longsword. There's some German longsword books, German wrestling books. So if you're interested in anything like that, I highly recommend you read Fiore. Do it. It's better. Nah, I'm just throwing stones. The German stuff is fun too, but the Fiore stuff just speaks to me. So that's why I like it. I do recommend giving it a shot. If you've only done the German stuff, it's got really some cool things in there, and some really, really nasty things you can do to the other guy when they swing a sword at you, which is always fun, right? So I think that's all I have for today. Thank you for tuning in, and from Links Armizare, I'm saying goodbye.